Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today it's a very exciting day because I'm getting to interview Matthew Evans. Hello.
Hey Chilli.
Hey, so I'm going to ask you a few questions about you and your farm and your farming life.
Yeah, no worries.
So what made you make the move from the glamorous Sydney food critic life to being a rural farmer?
It's a big question. The glamour is very short-lived with being a food critic. You essentially get to eat in all the places you don't, you're being paid to eat in the places you wouldn't choose to eat. Because what you're trying to do is find the good places, so you have to go to a whole range to find the good ones. So you have to eat in a lot of ones you don't like to find the good ones. So it wasn't that hard in a way. And some people have said, why did you give up that lifestyle as though I've given up something precious, when the shallowness of restaurant reviewing and hospitality, is beautiful, but it's not. We don't need to have it to be able to come here and live here and grow food and do something meaningful. Then there's no comparison. I haven't given up anything. I've gained everything.
Yeah, that's nice. I must compliment you because you have been a prolific content creator, writing books as well as your many TV shows, which inspires many others to, if not become farmers themselves, but at least getting good quality food in their life. Can you tell us a bit about the early days when you were trying to get the TV series going, as well as your early farming days?
Yeah, so that was exactly the same sort of time, because what happened was I was living in Sydney. I'd been meeting farmers and who were growing really amazing stuff, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to actually grow my own? Because I was eating in restaurants, and the restaurant food, the ingredients weren't as good as the farmers could give me at their farm gate oftentimes, partly because of the restaurants have to order it ahead, they have to handle it a lot, all that kind of thing, and the distance from the farm. So I was like, oh, I want to eat really well. I'm essentially very self-interested, so I wanted to eat well. So how can I get really good food on my table? I might need to grow it. So I moved to southern Tasmania to grow food, and at the same time I was chatting to people about what I was doing, and I was writing about this at the same time. And they said, well, what are you doing? You're meeting farmers. You're having what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm going to milk a cow, I'm going to fatten some pigs, I'm going to make prosciutto, I'm going to have some sheep. And they said, do you know how to do that? And I said, no, I have no clue. And they said, well, that sounds like, it might be interesting television.
Yeah.
I originally proposed a show where we just showed farming and interesting farmers. And they said, that doesn't, to be honest, that's not that interesting. And I was a bit disappointed because I'd just written a book, 65,000 words on these farmers. And so I thought it was quite interesting. But they were more interested, I guess, in telling that story through my journey of discovery, of moving to a property, learning how to manage plants and animals for the table.
So I saw an Instagram post that you've done years ago where you made gooseberry and rhubarb crumbles served with clotted ice cream, and that to me sounds absolutely divine because I personally love gooseberries. But how often do you get to indulge on these sort of things, or are you condemned to this daily torture?
So every day, when you grow the food, every day is an adventure, because essentially you're driven by the need to consume what you have produced, to not waste what you've produced. And so in the gooseberry season, or if you can raid the freezer and there's enough left, because we don't grow many gooseberries, it's magical. It's like, oh wow, we get to have gooseberries. But the raspberry season is very short. It's like essentially 3 weeks. We get 95% of our raspberries. The gooseberry season is about 1 week. And so every week you get this like, oh wow, isn't this great? And then the next week it's like, well, there's something else, so the gooseberries finish and the raspberries start, the raspberries finish, the apricots start, all that kind of thing. The only time it's difficult is actually probably about now, which is sort of late winter, early autumn, or actually even later, or early spring. And spring, even later in spring, can be what we call the hungry patch. And that's when your indulgences tend to come from the freezer or from the dairy cows, not from the garden, because the garden doesn't produce very much. It grows a lot, but there's not actually much to harvest in spring, late spring.
Yeah. So you have a new book coming out, Milk. I would be very interested to know what you think about raw milk.
What I think about raw milk. So raw milk's an interesting one, because for 10,000 years or so, humans have consumed raw milk, and it hasn't been so bad that we've stop drinking it. You know, obviously, you know, if were consuming something that was poisonous and killing us, then we would probably not do that anymore. So we've consumed milk for 10,000 years or so, and up until about 50 years ago, it was always raw. Maybe 100 years ago in some places, but a lot of what Australians drank, you know, even in my lifetime, and some of the cheeses we consume were made of raw milk. I guess the problem comes, if you think of milk, milk is a really super nutrient dense product, and it comes from, let's talk cow's milk, it comes from the cow in a form that's designed to nourish its babies. But we've bred them to produce way more milk than their babies need, so I can give my calf, can have its milk, and I can still get 10 litres a day. That milk is not designed to kill the baby calf. So it's not designed as a poison for the calf. And so if the mother's healthy, generally the milk is healthy. But the problem is, I guess, what happens after the milk comes from the cow. And that's where we saw tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people die from raw milk. Especially 150 years ago, thereabouts, when we became urbanised, separate from where the cow is, no refrigeration, and this super nutrient dense food, but nutrient dense means the good things can live in it and the bad things can live in it. So we didn't do the best that we could, and we managed to kill a lot of people with raw milk. I think these days we could probably do a lot better with refrigeration from the, straight from the cow. The milk is chilled, be chilled to the source, consume it in a very short period of time. That's the way it's supposed to be. We could probably do it, but I don't think the authorities trust us to be able to handle raw milk. And that, as a chef, that seems a bit weird, because we're trusted with raw eggs and we're trusted with raw chicken. We're trusted with oysters. I reckon oysters could kill a few people if they're badly handled. So milk is all about, the safety of it is in the handling. So as a chef, I'm trusted with raw oysters, as you are at home, but we're not trusted with raw milk. And so it would take a re-education campaign to say, well, if we had raw milk, it has to be looked after from the farm to the cow to the consumer, and everybody then has to take more responsibility for something that is super nutrient dense and has potentially lots of bioactive things that are good for us in it, but has the potential to breed up things that are bad for us.
Okay, so question: are you a regen farmer? And if so, what regen practices do you use?
And I like the way you said regen, because regenerative is really hard to say. I once did an audio book of soil, a book I wrote, and I should have said regen really early on, so then I wouldn't have to try and say regenerative lots of times. I think we are regenerative farmers, and we don't feel it's a term we need to badge ourselves with all the time. But what does it mean? It means, I guess, that we're trying to restore some of what potentially was here, so in terms of biodiversity, to improve soil health. And sometimes that might be taking soil health, taking a patch of land and making the soil more fertile than it was for tens of thousands of years. So making it even better than it probably was pre-white colonisation. So in our market garden, for example, the carbon levels have gone up. They've tripled, more than tripled in the 12 years we've had the farm. And the soil life is, different than a forest, but maybe that would have once been here, but potentially more fertile.
Yeah.
So what we look at is, can you rebuild? Can you restore what was there, and maybe even go further and make it even better? Better for growing food, so more abundant, but also really importantly, really good for wildlife and biodiversity. So on this farm we have bettongs and potoroos. These are endangered animals. We have wedge-tailed eagles soaring overhead. We have white goshawks. We have eastern barred bandicoots, brown bandicoots. We have antechinus. We've got Tasmanian devils. We have eastern quolls. So we have all these animals that are classified as threatened or endangered species, but for us, they're just part of the landscape, and they're increasing in numbers through the way we manage it.
Wow. What has been your biggest challenge on the farm?
The biggest challenge on the farm, I think, is really understanding it. I don't think that comes quickly or easily, to understand a landscape and to understand a place. I think it's always of benefit to have generational knowledge. And so we rely on the people who've lived here for a long time. Indigenous, sadly, the Malakadi people, so the Malakadi people are the traditional people from this land. But they got, as far as we know, they got exterminated through colonisation. So the Aboriginal people, and there's lots of Aboriginal people who still care for these landscapes, but they're not from this particular part of Tasmania. They're from, they're descendants of people from further north. So we don't have some knowledge that we can use. So what we're trying to do is, I guess, learn about this place from the people who've been here for as long as as possible, but also learn how to manage this place, maybe using other ideas that aren't from here traditionally, and how can we look after this place better. And that's a challenge. Like, that's really huge. That's really hard to do. We make lots of mistakes all the time, and I don't put them on Instagram usually. Well, sometimes I do, but usually not. Like all of us, we don't show our worst side.
Yeah. So, what are some gems of advice that you could give to young aspiring farmers? Yeah,
gems of advice. I don't know if I had gems of advice. I don't know. I'd be shouting them from the rooftops. Look, I think the most important thing is to listen. Listen to elders. Listen to Indigenous people. Listen to landscapes and listen to seasons. So when we first started farming, we didn't do that, and we very quickly overgrazed and damaged the land that was, in our care. And so when that was a different property over the river, over the hill there, and so now we're down here, and when we arrive, we're like, okay, let's not do that again. Let's listen to what this place needs. And every year's a bit different, every season's a bit different. But gradually you get to understand the rhythms and what this patch of land needs, what it can give us as humans for the plate, what it can give us in terms of awe, in terms of wonder and joy, what it needs in terms of wildlife. Yeah, so if you can do one thing, I guess it's listen before you act.
Cool. What are your major goals for the next 2 years?
I love it when the dogs come. Off you go, you down. Sorry, what are my major goals?
Major goals for the next 2 years.
The next 2 years? Oh, like any farm, not go broke, because it's hard to do. It's hard to do good work if you're not making any money. Look, I think the main goals we have are to work out how to run this patch of land in a way that doesn't break us. So I'm nearly 60 years old, heading towards 60. And so our ambition is to be on this patch of land when we're 80 and have people bring food to us from this patch of land. So how do we build the community around us of like-minded individuals who can benefit, I guess, from access to land, and but also can benefit us, and the land benefits from having them here. And that's a great challenge for all farmers, I think. Succession, if you've got family in this, who want to get into farming, or if you're a young person and trying to succeed someone else. But in terms of young people getting into farming, being able to stay in farming and make a living at it, because let's face it, so badly paid. That's the tragedy of the society we live in, that nobody wants to pay for food, which means no one wants to pay us.
Yeah. Well, you've answered all my questions. Thank you very much for this interview.
No worries, Chilli.
And like always, folks, don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you next time.
See ya.